I'd like to talk about recognising historical landscapes, recognising ancient landscapes, recognising planned landscapes. I'm here at Hoxne in Suffolk, which is riddled with history and prehistory. So if you go upstream along this small river, there's an area where there's an ex-lake, and John Frere wrote a paper in 1797 when he showed that the lake sediment there contained flint axes that were clearly made by people a long time ago. This has subsequently been dated as 400,000 years old. This was the first indication that there were ancient humans in existence. And then somewhere over there, a couple of kilometres away, there's been a find of Roman coins and jewellery and kitchenware, 15,000 pieces, so one of the best finds in Britain. And this is gold and silver and bronze. And then Edmund was king of East Anglia, where we are now. And in 869, the Vikings came down here and killed him. And because the story is he didn't fight
or renounce Christianity,
he was then made a martyr, so he's St Edmund. This bridge here is also famous as being the bridge under which Edmund hid. And then after he'd been captured, his body was taken a kilometre up there. His head was cut off, it was thrown into the wood, and then the story is that it was subsequently found with a wolf standing over it. And then after that, because of him being a martyr, his body was collected and taken and buried in what we now call Bury St Edumnds, obviously named after him. So it's not clear how much of that story is true, but it's an important historical site. So Hoxne is riddled in history and prehistory. But you can recognise ancient countryside that's at least 1,000 years old, by a whole set of different clues. And I'd just like to say that we can recognise that this site is ancient from these clues. If you look over there, it's kind of hard to see, but there's a set of fields that are small and irregularly shaped. If you look at the road here, you can see how it wiggles. If you look at the road ahead, you can also see this is a wiggly road, and it's a wiggly road because it's going round ancient woods, it's joining farmhouses and hamlets, it's going round irregularly shaped fields. And so you can tell when you're in ancient countryside because you zigzag all over the place. And so ancient landscapes consisted of isolated houses or small groups of houses, hamlets. So I'm not saying this is 1,000 years old, but perhaps there was a house here previously. But this is what it'd be like. There'd be isolated houses scattered through the countryside. And then the fields would be irregularly shaped rather than the rectangular fields you might see later. So over here, rather irregularly shaped field. And then there's the woods are also irregularly shaped. So here's a wood with an elm hedge running on this side. And then ancient landscapes have footpaths, rather like this footpath here, which is characteristic of this landscape type. And the woodlands, if they're ancient woodlands, one of the signs is that they have coppiced hazel trees. These are trees that are cut from the base so they go up and resprout and can be used for poles and all sorts of things like that. And you can see here there's a whole set of coppiced trees running along here. There's a coppiced tree, there's a nice coppiced hazel tree. I'll show you one more. Quite a nice large one. So these have been abandoned, but previously you could cut it from the base, it would grow, and if you wanted a small pole, you'd wait a few years. If you wanted a large pole, you'd wait 10 or 15 years before cutting it again. So, and over there's some more irregularly shaped fields. So ancient countrysides are very different. They're very intimate. They consist of irregularly shaped ancient woodlands, irregular fields, footpaths, isolated houses, small groups of houses, and roads that wiggle in between them. And they're very different from the planned landscapes that we'll go to now. Traditionally, there was rights of farming to local communities. They had the rights to grow arable crops in strips. They had rights of ownership of animals which they then grazed on common land. The process of enclosure meant that individuals claimed ownership of this land, and the communal grazing rights and communal farming stopped. In 1549, Robert Kett met with others
who were upset by enclosure
under this tree. It's called Kett's Oak, and they then moved to Norwich, and 16,000 of them then ended up raiding Norwich and capturing Norwich. And then after that, the government forces came and then killed Kett. He was hung from Norwich Castle, and 9 members of the rebels were then hung from this tree. This process of enclosure occurred at scale in the 18th and 19th century, particularly through what are called the Inclosure Acts, an older spelling. The Inclosure Acts resulted in the ownership of large areas of countryside, and this was then restructured. So the small fields were restructured around large fields. They were made squarer, more rectangular. So you can see here this large square field. You can see over there another rectangular field. And then these would have hedges of hawthorn, often newly planted to show ownership. The roads will be straighter because they're connecting centres. So we'd moved from the ancient countryside of wiggly roads, of small irregular fields, of irregular woods, of footpaths, to one of planned countryside, whereby there'd be far fewer people. People tended to then move to the towns, and larger fields, regularly sized fields, hawthorn hedges, fewer woods, squarer woods, and a very, very different landscape. And you can see this if you look at the landscape in Britain today. Looking at the lowlands, there are areas that are ancient. So the previous video was in Suffolk. South Suffolk is ancient countryside. Here I'm in Norfolk, and Norfolk is largely planned countryside, and that distinction occurs across a lot of the country. So understanding the appearance of the country, the landscape, the connectivity depends a lot upon the history.